Hi friends, it's Taylor. Welcome back to the channel where we talk about all things financial self-care. If that's something you're interested in, be sure to join our community by subscribing. Today we're going to talk about 5 different budget structures that you can use in Monarch. Before we jump in, I wanted to say thank you to Monarch Money for allowing me access to the demo account so that I could create this video for you all without messing up my personal data. Thank you, Monarch. So now we're going to jump into the first budget structure in Monarch, which is by life areas. And this is the default setup in Monarch, so I haven't changed anything here. And you can see that these groups are based on the type of spending that will be going on. For example, housing has your mortgage and rent and home improvement. Food and dining has a mixture of groceries, restaurants, coffee shops, and shopping has regular shopping, clothes, and electronics. So a pro about this structure is that it is already the default structure in Monarch, which means that you don't have to do much customization. Another pro about this setup is that without expanding the categories, you can see very quickly how much you have left to spend in that particular area. If this category was closed and I just wanted to see in general how much I have left for food and dining, I can look in this column here where it says remaining, and I can know when I'm out and about that I have $172 left. Now, of course, if you want to see exactly how that is spread out throughout your categories, you can just expand the category and update your budget here. So let's say based on me adjusting the budget, I now have $187 that I can spend on groceries. I think this could be really helpful when you are on the go and you just want to quickly see how much you have left to spend on a particular category or category group without doing too much work on the spot. A con I would say about this setup is that all of your categories are spread out across so many different groups. So depending on how long you want to spend doing your budget reviews, you'll have to consider how much time that you need to spend finding the category that you're looking for, and also expanding and or closing those whenever you're done. So that is something to consider. The next structure is going to be by priority, and that is how I have my personal budget set up, which you can check any of my monthly budget reviews to see how I use that in action. A pro for this setup is that it is a widely known structure for people using tons of different budget apps and systems. I'm sure you all have heard of the 50-30-20 budget, which says that you should spend 50% on your needs, 30% on your wants, and 20% towards savings and debts. Now, my variation of this setup does split the savings and debt categories into 2 separate groups, which is why I have wealth for all of my debt payments and investments, and then my savings are going to go down here into goals. And that leads me into the second pro for this setup, which is that it really works well with Monarch. So Monarch already has an automatic section for tracking your savings and transfers and things like that. And so because there's already a built-in section, that's less work for you. And then you'll just have all of your debt payments and things like that in this category, and you can keep them separate. When you go onto your cash flow page and we can do the budget by group, you have those percentages here. Now you'll notice that the savings category is actually not here on the bar chart view, which is why I started using the Sankey diagram. And so here, by budgeting by group, I can see those 4 percentages here. So I saved about 36%, 36% went to my needs, about 20% went to wants, and a little less than 9% went to wealth. So this structure can be really helpful if you are trying to align with that general budget guideline, and it makes it really easy to see if you are hitting those percentages or if you want to adjust your budget and create your own guidelines. A con with this setup is that until you get used to the setup, you won't really know where your categories are immediately by looking at it. For example, I had to expand the wants category to see that pets was under it. Now, this is just for an example, so maybe pets are a need to you and you can move them to that category. But just for the sake of this example, you can see that I did have to expand and kind of briefly read through all the other categories before I find this one. Because I've been using Monarch for almost a year now, I kind of already know where my categories are going to be when I come into Monarch. But if you are trying a completely new setup, this is something to consider, that it may take you a little bit longer to find your categories as opposed to the life areas one, where you can automatically see where your categories are based on just the group name without expanding them. The next setup we have is by Paycheck, which I think will be really helpful for someone that maybe gets paid bi-weekly or weekly and wants to be a little bit more specific about how much they have to spend before they get paid again. So for this budget setup, I recommend starting each month with zeros across the board so that you can start from the beginning about how much you have to work with, and it'll just make the process easier. So let's say it's the first Friday of the month and we just got paid. So I'm gonna open this income group, and under Paycheck 1, let's say we got paid $2,000. And now this over here is going to update, and we now have $2,000 of what we actually got paid to assign. So I'm going to close up income, and because this is the first paycheck, I can see that all of these categories here are the ones that are actually coming out of this pay period. So let's say we're going to put $400 towards our car payment, $300 to daycare, $50 to water, let's say $200 to gas and electric, $200 to groceries, $100 to our phone, $200 to gas. Maybe our student loan payments are $400, and for entertainment, we'll just do $75, and the same for restaurants and bars. So now you can see that this has gone down to a dash, which is equal to 0. And that means that with this first paycheck of $2,000, we have split it between all of our different categories based on what is coming out this month. I do want to point out for this setup that I think it would be really helpful to have dates next to each of the categories based on when they're coming out. So let's say the car payment comes out on the 7th, and let's say the daycare comes out on the 10th. So you could do the same for all of your categories and even organize them in an order that makes sense to you, maybe with the earliest date at the top and then the last date here at the bottom. So what do you do if you want to split money between your paychecks to certain big payments such as rent? So if I go to the Paycheck 2 category, we can see that my rent is going to come out on the 20th, and today is the 7th, and we just got paid. We want to go ahead and put money to the side for our rent. So let's say we take the $400 from the student loans category, for example, and we put that at 0. And instead, with this $400 that we have left over, we just want to put that towards the rent here. So now, with this paycheck, we've assigned it to everything coming out in this first paycheck, and we've also assigned $400, which comes out in the next paycheck. Now, based on when your student loans are coming out, it may not be the best to take it from that particular category, but I think you understand how this could be helpful to assign that money across different categories in a way that makes sense to you. Another way you could split payments between paychecks is to have a separate category underneath that paycheck. So I'm going to unhide this so you all can see. I have this one called Mortgage Rent 1, and we will just rename this to Mortgage Rent 2. And I'm going to set this to 0 again. We could just put $200 towards the rent from our first paycheck, and then another $200 from the second paycheck. And obviously, as you continue to get paid throughout the month, let's say your next paycheck is also $2,000. If our rent is $1,500, we would just increase this to the amount that we need. So we would add $1,300 here and put $1,500. And now we have this assigned, and we have $700 left to work with that we can assign to these other categories. So let's say $120 for internet, the insurance is another $200, pets is $150, shops is $50, and personal is $180. And now we're back to a zero-based budget again, because with all the income that we've earned so far this month, we've already decided how we are going to use that money across the different paychecks. Now, of course, if you get paid more than twice a month, you can add as many category groups as you'd like. I have this third paycheck here as an example for someone who gets paid bi-weekly, and maybe they just treat this third paycheck as extra income. And so When they get paid here, they just use it for shopping or to go travel. Our next budget setup is going to be fixed versus flexible. Under the fixed budget group, you're going to have all of your categories and expenses that have a set amount that comes out every month and it does not change. So that would be your rent, your car payments, your loan payments, your insurance, your utilities such as garbage, gas, electric, etc. Under flexible, you're going to have things that may fluctuate on a monthly basis. For example, last month I spent $499, but this month I only spent $373. So because this is an expense that changes on a monthly basis, I would want to put this in flexible. A pro for setting up your budget this way is that you'll have more flexibility if you need to reduce your spending in certain areas because something came up. If money is really tight this month, I can reduce my spending in shopping and clothing and going out to restaurants, but I'll already know to ignore everything in the fixed category because these are amounts that I can't change. For example, I can't reduce spending in my rent, even though I would like to. I would also like to point out that with this structure, you can actually set your fixed group to be budgeted by group. So right now, everything is budgeted by category, which means I can have an individual amount set for my car payment, another one for my loan, another one for insurance. But because these amounts are fixed and I don't need to revisit these amounts every month, I can just go over here to the settings icon and switch this to budget by group. And now this entire budget group will just have one single number and I won't have to manually edit the categories as the month goes on. So I'll click save and you'll see that the entire budget for this group is $2,725 and the budget column for each category is going to be blank because you don't need to budget by each individual category when the amounts are not going to be switching every month. I consider this to be a pro because you can save a lot of time by just knowing that you are going to spend this amount every month and that won't change. Another setup you can do in Monarch is by cash flow. And I have just put all of the categories into this group called all. When I expand this, you'll see that I have organized all of my categories based on how much the expense is from greatest to least. So for example, my rent is $1,500. Auto payment is $600, shopping $500, clothing $200, and so on. Now, I didn't organize all of these categories because that would just take way too long, but using these ones that I did rank as an example, a pro for this setup would be that you can start small by eliminating expenses. If you are someone who is struggling with a lot of spending and you don't really know where you can start cutting back, you can start by looking at the smallest expense. So let's say this month I want to cut out coffee. I would just set this to 0. You can see that I've cut out that smallest expense and now I have $25 more back in my pocket. So this could be really helpful if you are trying to get a little bit more control on your spending and maximize your savings. A con for this setup is that when you review your cash flow percentages, everything is going to be in one budget group, so your data reviews are going to be a little bit limited. I'm here on the cash flow page using the Sankey diagram again, and you can see because I have budgeted this by group, it just puts all of this into one category. So you really don't have that diversified view of where your spending is going because everything is just grouped together. Now you could bypass this by looking at your cash flow by category, and now it breaks things down based on all of the categories that you have. And of course, when you go to the bar chart, it just groups all of your expenses together, which isn't really helpful. So you can do by category and do the same percentages here, or you can even group by merchant. So now let's get into troubleshooting and potential questions. The first thing you may have noticed is that with all of the setups I showed today, there was this placeholder category called Other. Now you can definitely delete this if you want by going to the settings icon and deleting it, or you can also do this in your settings. I like to keep it there because I want it to be, as I said, a placeholder for maybe some things that I am no longer budgeting for, but I don't want to delete the category because once you delete it from the category, you lose that historical data for it. For example, let's say that I am no longer making any payments on my loans. So I'm going to set this to 0. And now, because I don't really want to see this all the time anymore, I'm just going to move this category to other. And now I just have the categories that I'm focusing on right now. And I can put everything else that is kind of on the back burner in the other group. The next thing that I wanted to point out is a new feature from Monarch, which is up here on the top right called Budget Settings. When you open this up, you have two options. You can recalculate the default budgets, which means that it uses the history of all of your spending and income to create a new budget. So this is going to be really helpful for someone who has either never budgeted before or has no idea how much they're actually spending. So I'm going to click recalculate, and we'll notice that all the numbers in the background are going to adjust. Let's click on some flexible spending categories to see how it calculated the average. For restaurants and bars, it looks like we averaged $50 over the past few months, so it created a new guideline for us to follow. And for gas, looks like we've averaged about 100. So once again, I think this feature could be really helpful if you are not really trying to calculate your budget from scratch, and instead you just want to go with the averages that you've been spending and go from there. The next thing we have in the budget settings is to clear all the budget values. So that is going to be the complete opposite of what we just did. Instead of using pre-calculated guidelines for our spending, we can go ahead and clear everything and start from scratch. So I'm going to clear all and make sure we confirm that. And now everything is set to 0. So this is going to be helpful for you if you just want a completely fresh start to your budget and you don't really want to rely on your previous spending because maybe you've had a drastic life change and maybe you have lower income or higher income. Or maybe you just want to change your spending habits on your journey to financial independence. And as I'm filming this, it's nearing the end of December. So this is perfect for anyone that wants to come into January with a fresh start. The forecast system in Monarch is going to be another really helpful budgeting tool if you want to, at a glance, see how much you've been spending over the past couple of months. So for example, with the needs group here, you can see we're averaging a little over $3,000 a month. And if I expand this, I can see all of my categories, and I know that my rent is the same all across, but maybe for my restaurants and spending, it's starting to creep up a little bit as we get closer to the end of the year. So maybe you want to take this time to readjust. I frequently use the forecast when I want to look at my own spending trends, and also as I'm preparing to do my annual budget for the next year. Let's say that I know in March my rent is going to increase from $1,385 to $1,500. And so I'll enter in that change here. And now this helps me better plan for my spending and my savings goals, because I know that I'm going to have a little bit less to save starting in March because my rent is going up. So I really do appreciate the forecast feature, and I think it is great for both planning for the year ahead and also reviewing your spending for the current year. And lastly, I wanted to remind everyone that if you want to change anything in the budget structures that I have shown today, you just need to go to your settings, go to categories. You can just click and edit any of the groups or any of the categories and rename them to whatever you like, and you can also change the icon. Some things to note as you scroll on the settings page is that if you add any custom categories, they are going to have this little text here that says custom, which means that you can delete these because these are the ones that you added. But for everything else, these are default categories in Monarch that you cannot delete, but you can deactivate. So let's say that office rent is not something that applies to me. I'm just going to click office rent and deactivate. And now it's saying I will no longer see this anywhere in the app, which is perfect for me. So I'm going to click disable, and now it is hidden here and it will not be on the budget page. Another thing to note when you're deleting categories is that if you have some expenses tied to a specific category, you will have to relocate them before you deactivate. So let's say I want to get rid of this clothing line item. I'm going to click deactivate. And it's saying that before I get rid of this category, I need to reassign these transactions. So I'm going to move the clothing category to shopping because that's something that makes sense to me. So I'll click shopping and disable. And now all of the transactions that were in the clothing category are now in shopping. All right, everyone, that is it for today's video. I know that because I was using a demo account, there were a lot of categories as I was switching through the different structures, but nevertheless, I hope you still found it helpful and maybe gave you some insight on how you can use Monarch for your needs. If you have any questions about the setups I showed today, be sure to leave them in the comments below and I will respond and help as best as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.